Every 4 years, the world pauses, not just to watch a game, but to witness the creation of immortality. There is a singular, agonizingly beautiful moment when the ball leaves a striker's foot and finds the back of the net, freezing the heartbeat of a nation and etching a name into the granite of sporting history. We are not just talking about tap-ins or lucky deflections. We are talking about the cold, ruthless art of the finish. Today, June 25, 2026, as we stand in the midst of a World Cup that has seen records shatter before our very eyes, we look back to find the men who built this house of legends. Across the decades, from the muddy pitches of the 1930s to the high-tech stadiums of today, a select group of men have mastered this craft. How do we weigh the impact of these legends? Is it about the volume of goals, or the pressure of the moments? We have crunched the numbers, updated the archives, and distilled the essence of the game's greatest killers. Today, we begin our journey through the 12 deadliest strikers to ever walk the World Cup stage. We start our countdown with a name that often slips through the cracks of modern memory, a testament to the fact that greatness is sometimes buried under the weight of time: Gyula Zengala. In the fierce, unforgiving battles of the 1938 World Cup, Zengala was the sharpest blade in the Hungarian arsenal. He didn't just score goals, he dismantled defensive lines with a quiet, efficient brutality. Hungary was a team on the verge of greatness, and Zengala was their heartbeat. In just a handful of matches, he accumulated a tally of 10 goals that remains a benchmark for clinical efficiency in the pre-war era. He wasn't the loudest player on the pitch, nor the one the cameras followed with obsessive focus, but when the ball fell to his feet inside that penalty area, the game was effectively over. His impact on that tournament was profound, helping carry Hungary to the brink of the trophy. Yet, history is a fickle storyteller. The shadow of the impending war and the subsequent geopolitical shifts meant that Zengala's brilliance was partially obscured, turning him into one of the game's greatest what-ifs. To understand his impact, we have to look at the landscape of 1938, a world fractured and anxious, where football served as the only truly universal language. Zengala played with the weight of that anxiety on his shoulders, turning the frustration of a volatile era into the controlled, explosive power required to beat the best goalkeepers in the world. He was a master of positioning, a striker who could read the defensive shift before it happened, adjusting his angle of attack with a subtle shift in weight. It's easy to look at the black and white footage, grainy and distant, and dismiss the technical mastery of that era, but that would be a grave mistake. Zengala's finishing was as sophisticated as any forward working in the tactical landscape of 2026. He had the instinct, the composure, and, above all, the terrifying ability to remain calm when the entire world was watching. But Zengala is only the first piece of this complex, beautiful puzzle. As we move up the ladder, the strikers become faster, the defenses more organized, and the stakes exponentially higher. We are talking about players who are not just goalscorers, but cultural phenomena, men who could shift the mood of an entire hemisphere with a single strike. Behind the goals and the glory of these strikers lie stories of personal sacrifice, of overcoming overwhelming odds, and of a relentless pursuit of perfection that often cost them everything outside of the 90 minutes. We have the data, we have the history, and we have the drama. But as we transition to the 11th name on our list, you have to ask yourself, how many of these strikers had to change the very way the game was played just to stay relevant? The answer is a journey into the evolution of football itself, and it starts with a man who redefined what it meant to be a master of space in the heat of a World Cup summer. The countdown has begun, the archives are open, and the legends are ready to be re-evaluated. Are you prepared to see who makes the cut? Because if Zengala set the standard for clinical finishing, the player waiting in the 11th spot took that standard and turned it into an obsession that spanned 4 different continents and nearly 2 decades. The pressure is only going to mount from here, and the stories are only getting deeper. To truly appreciate the history of the World Cup, one must look beyond the traditional titans of South America and Western Europe and recognize the players who arrived as underdogs, carrying the dreams of a region that was yearning for its place on the global stage. Our 11th greatest goalscorer is not a household name for the casual observer of today, but for the football purist, his name is synonymous with the golden era of Polish football, Grzegorz Lato. In an era when the tactical rigidness of the Eastern Bloc was slowly beginning to crack, Lato emerged as a lightning rod of speed and predatory instinct. With 10 goals across his World Cup career, he didn't just score, he defined the transition into the modern, high-intensity winger. He wasn't a static striker waiting for the ball to find his feet. He was a dynamic force who stretched the field, utilizing the entire width of the pitch to create panic in the hearts of the world's most disciplined defenses. His crowning moment came during the 1974 World Cup in West Germany, a tournament where Poland shocked the footballing world and finished in third place, with Lato securing the Golden Boot by scoring 7 goals. Imagine the atmosphere of that time, a tournament heavy with the political and social tensions of the Cold War, and then imagine a winger with a relentless, driving pace who treated every match like a mission for national pride. Lato played with a terrifying simplicity. He possessed an explosive burst of speed that, even by the standards of modern 2026 football, would leave most fullbacks isolated and exposed. But what made his 10-goal tally so impressive wasn't just his pace, it was his decision-making in the final third. When he faced a goalkeeper, there was no panic. He had that rare, cold-blooded quality that allowed him to wait for the exact moment the keeper committed his weight, and then, with a flick of his boot, bypass the challenge with surgical accuracy. What makes Lato's inclusion in our pantheon so vital is the context of his era. He was the spearhead of a team that played with a collective discipline that was often ahead of its time, yet it was his individual brilliance that provided the finishing touch. He wasn't just a byproduct of a good system. He was the primary reason why that system functioned at a championship level. He forced teams to change their defensive structures, pushing their fullbacks deep and creating massive gaps in the midfield that his teammates could then exploit. His legacy is one of pure, unadulterated speed used as a weapon of precision. He proved that an underdog nation, with the right combination of tactical organization and individual genius, could stand toe-to-toe with the giants of the sport and win. But as we look at the legends ahead of him, we start to see how the role of the striker began to evolve. Lato was the winger who scored like a centre-forward, but the next name on our list, our 10th place striker, would take that predatory instinct and focus it almost entirely within the confines of the penalty area. We are moving away from the wide-ranging operators to the players who are masters of the fox-in-the-box mentality. The next player is a man who turned the penalty area into his personal hunting ground, and whose name has become the universal definition of scoring efficiency. As we climb higher, the margin between these goalscorers becomes agonizingly thin. We are talking about players who didn't just participate in tournaments, they dominated them, turning matches into personal exhibitions of their lethal craft. The pressure of our countdown is mounting, and the narratives are becoming increasingly intricate, with every goal serving as a piece of a larger, grander story of World Cup survival and eventual glory. Are you prepared to meet the man who made goal-scoring feel like a mechanical inevitability? Because the player in our 10th spot is a name that every single fan of the game knows, a legend whose presence on the pitch always meant one thing: trouble. The archives are open, the history is set, and the 10th legend is waiting. To understand the beauty of the World Cup, one must understand that it doesn't always reward the most technically gifted dancer on the pitch. Sometimes, it rewards the player who understands the geometry of the game better than anyone else. Enter the 10th greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, Thomas Müller. If you look for Müller in the highlight reels of the greatest dribblers or the most powerful shooters, you might miss him entirely. He is the antithesis of Brazilian flair or French elegance. He is lanky, moves with a slightly awkward, disjointed gait, and often seems to be operating in a different temporal reality than his peers. Yet, when the biggest stage in sports arrives, he is there, standing in the right spot, at the right time, as if the ball itself is magnetically attracted to him. With 10 goals in 4 different World Cups, his record isn't built on raw athleticism. It is built on the sheer, terrifying brilliance of his footballing intelligence. He famously calls himself the Raumdeuter, the space investigator, and watching him at a World Cup is like watching a master detective solving a crime that hasn't happened yet. Müller arrived at the 2010 tournament as an unknown entity, a gangly kid from Bavaria whom nobody expected to lead the line for a German machine in transition. But by the end of that summer, He had walked away with the golden boot. It wasn't about the power of his strike. It was about his predatory instinct to exploit the smallest, most invisible gaps in elite defenses. He thrives in the chaos, in those messy seconds after a deflection or a scramble where defenders lose their focus for a heartbeat. While other strikers spend their energy trying to win one-on-one duels, Muller is already calculating where the ball will land 5 seconds before it is even played. He is the ultimate ghost of the penalty area, a player who turns football into a game of chess played at the speed of a 100-meter sprint. There is a deeply satisfying, almost cynical efficiency to his scoring. He doesn't care about the aesthetics of the goal, only that his name is on the scoresheet when the final whistle blows. The consistency of his output across the 2010, 2014, 2018, and 2022 editions is what elevates his status to the pantheon of World Cup legends. Most strikers are defined by a singular, flaming hot tournament, a moment where everything aligns perfectly. Muller, however, turned World Cup scoring into a repeatable, systemic process. Even as the German team evolved and his role shifted from lead striker to creative conductor, his presence remained a constant, looming threat. He represents the triumph of the mind over the body, a reminder that in the hypermodern era of high-speed football, there is still no substitute for knowing exactly where the danger lies. Watching him navigate a World Cup knockout game is a masterclass in spatial awareness. He forces defenders to make impossible choices, constantly dragging them out of their comfort zones until they finally crumble under the weight of his positioning. He is, without doubt, the most intelligent predator to ever grace the tournament, a player who made his lack of traditional grace his greatest tactical advantage. But even a master of space cannot hold back the tide of time forever. As his international career began to shift into its twilight, we saw a different Muller, a leader who became the emotional core of a team in search of its identity. He remained the primary target for critics who couldn't quantify his specific value, but those who understood the game knew that his legacy was already set in stone. He proved that you don't need to be the fastest or the strongest to dominate the global stage. You just need to be the smartest. Yet, as we climb this ranking, we will see that some strikers brought something far more volatile and aggressive to the pitch. We are moving from the cerebral, calculated finishers to the players who viewed the goal as a battlefield, demanding total conquest every time they crossed the white line. We are just scratching the surface of this pantheon, and the gap in class between these legendary figures is thinner than a razor's edge. If the 10th man on our list could dismantle a defense with just a subtle movement into space, what do you think the 9th place striker did to earn his place among the immortal goalscorers of the beautiful game? The answer, as you might expect, involves a level of brutality and grace that remains a standard for strikers to this day. The climb is getting steeper, the names are becoming heavier with history, and the pressure is only going to mount from here. The archive is just getting started, and the next player on our list is someone who redefined what the fans expected from a striker on the biggest stage. To understand the 9th greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, you have to throw away every preconceived notion you have about what a flashy striker looks like. If some strikers are painters, dancing through defensive lines with delicate brushstrokes, Gabriel Batistuta was the sculptor who worked only with a hammer. We are talking about the man they called Batigol, the Argentine striker who played the game as if he were trying to punish the ball for existing. With 10 goals in just 12 appearances across 3 World Cups, Batistuta didn't just score, he decimated. While our previous entries mastered the art of spatial intelligence, Batistuta mastered the art of total, uncompromising confrontation. When you watch the archive footage of his strikes, you aren't just seeing a goal, you are seeing a physics experiment gone wrong. He possessed a shot that seemed to bypass the laws of defensive reaction time, a thunderbolt of sheer, unadulterated will that sent goalkeepers diving in directions that only served to highlight their own helplessness. He was a force of nature in a jersey, a player who redefined the limits of what a striker could provide to a team in the heat of a tournament. Batistuta was the absolute personification of Argentine grit, a player who carried the immense weight of his nation's expectations not with the grace of a dancer, but with the posture of a soldier. In the 1994, 1998, and 2002 World Cups, he was the primary target of every defensive scheme. Every nation knew exactly what he was capable of, and yet, They were powerless to stop him. He is one of the very few players in history to score hat-tricks in 2 different World Cups, a statistic that feels almost ridiculous when you consider the defensive quality he was up against. It wasn't just the technical skill, it was the psychological advantage he held before the game even started. You could see the subtle shift in the body language of his markers the moment he turned toward the goal. They knew they were in a fight for their lives, and more often than not, they lost. His impact was particularly felt in the 1998 tournament in France, where he was at the absolute apex of his powers. He played with a ferocity that seemed to terrify not just the defenders, but the entire stadium. There was no hesitation in his game, no unnecessary flair, and no room for doubt. If the ball came into his radius, he was going to test the strength of the net. He played with a singular, driving focus that turned every possession into a potential calamity for the opponent. It's important to remember that Batistuta was playing in a period where defensive structures were becoming increasingly complex and physical, yet he managed to cut through them with a simplicity that felt almost like a lost art. He didn't need complicated patterns or elaborate build-ups. He just needed a half-yard of space and a vision of the goal, and the rest was usually a formality. But behind the thunderous strikes and the celebratory machine gun gestures, Batistuta was a man grappling with the intense, often crushing, pressure of being Argentina's primary hope. The tournament was, for him, a battlefield where he had to constantly prove that he was worthy of the mantle he had inherited. It is a level of pressure that breaks most players, yet for him, it seemed to be the very thing that allowed him to ascend to such heights. He remains a cautionary legend, a reminder that great goalscoring is not just a function of technique, but a function of emotional stamina. He burned so brightly during those 3 tournaments that it is easy to forget the physical cost his playing style exacted on his body. He was a warrior who played until there was literally nothing left to give, a man who left every ounce of himself on the field of play in the name of the goal. As we climb higher, we will see strikers whose legends are defined by different, even more dramatic narratives, players who won it all, and those who tragically fell just short. We are shifting now from the men who simply broke records to the men who defined the eras they played in. The 8th striker on our list is an icon who took everything we've discussed about positioning and power and added a dimension of flair that still sets the gold standard for attackers today. If Batistuta was the hammer, the next name on our list was the blade, precise, elegant, and ultimately, impossible to defend against. The climb to the top is getting more difficult, and the names that follow are the ones that every football fan on the planet knows by heart. The statistics are becoming more inflated, the drama more intense, and the history more significant with every step we take. Are you prepared to see who is next in our journey through the archives? Because the closer we get to the top, the more these stories look like the very definition of football legend itself. Stay with us as we uncover the 8th greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, a name that resonates through the annals of time as the very definition of a technical genius. The countdown continues, and the stakes are higher than they've ever been. To understand the 8th greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, you have to appreciate the concept of economy of motion. David Villa, the man affectionately known as El Guaje, didn't need to overwhelm a defender with power or raw speed. He simply possessed a terrifyingly precise understanding of where the ball needed to be, and exactly how to put it there. With 10 goals in just 12 matches, his efficiency rate remains one of the most remarkable statistics in the tournament's history. Villa didn't dominate the pitch through physical intimidation. He dismantled it through surgical intervention. Watching him play in the 2010 World Cup, where he almost single-handedly dragged Spain to their first ever title, was like watching an artist at work. He was the focal point of a team that relied on intricate passing patterns, but it was his ruthless, final touch that turned all that possession into immortality. He was the perfect striker for that specific era of football, a man who could operate in the tightest of spaces, surrounded by defenders, and still find the gap that led to the goal. What set Villa apart was his capacity to deliver under the weight of an entire nation's history. Before 2010, Spain was a country defined by tragic exits and tournament heartbreaks, a team that could play beautiful football but never seemed to have the killer instinct required to win the biggest prize of all. Villa became that instinct. He was the silent, lethal presence who ensured that the dominance of the Spanish midfield wasn't just a spectacle, but a winning formula. Every goal he scored felt like a release of tension, a catharsis for a country that had waited decades for its moment in the sun. He didn't just score goals, he scored destination goals, the strikes that ended the deadlock, the ones that sent the team into the next round, the ones that defined the legacy of a golden generation. His ability to remain calm while the entire world looked on, waiting for him to falter, is a testament to the ironclad psychological resolve that separates the elite from the truly legendary. Beyond the numbers, Villa's legacy is rooted in his technical versatility. He could finish with his right foot, his left foot, or his head, and he could do it from virtually any angle within the final third. He wasn't a static striker. He was a mobile, intelligent operator who could drop deep to link up play or run the channels to stretch a defense. This versatility made him a nightmare for managers to game plan against. You could pack your defense with size, you could double team him, you could try to bully him off the ball, but El Guaje always seemed to find a way to escape your control. He was the master of the one-touch finish, a player who needed only the slightest window of opportunity to convert a half chance into a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for his fans. But as we celebrate his technical brilliance, it's worth remembering that Villa's greatness was forged through a career of overcoming doubt. Early in his journey, he was told he was too small, too slight, not built for the bruising reality of top-tier football. He had to be smarter, faster, and more technically refined than anyone else just to survive. That chip on his shoulder never truly left him. It fueled his professional life and made him the striker who could thrive when the pressure was at its absolute peak. He carried that hunger onto the World Cup stage, turning every match into a personal challenge to prove the doubters wrong one more time. It was this internal drive that made him so consistent, so reliable, and so utterly deadly when the game was on the line. As we continue our ascent, we move into the territory of the strikers who were truly larger than life. The names ahead are not just footballers. They are the benchmarks by which all future strikers are measured. We are moving from the legends to the icons, the players whose World Cup stories are the very fabric of the tournament's mythology. If Villa was the master of technical perfection, the seventh name on our list brought a level of raw, instinctive power that changed the way defenses prepared for a match entirely. The list is becoming a collection of the absolute elite, and the narratives are intensifying with every step. We are tracing the evolution of the goal itself, seeing how the pressure to perform on the world stage creates, defines, and eventually tests the limits of the men who live for the goal. We have more stories to tell, more archive footage to dissect, and more legends to honor. Stay with us as we uncover the seventh greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, a name that resonates through the annals of time as the very definition of a technical genius. The countdown continues, and the stakes are higher than they've ever been. To understand the seventh greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, you have to appreciate the concept of economy of motion. Gary Lineker was not a player of tricks, backheels, or long-range screamers. He was something far more terrifying for the defenses of the 1980s and 90s. He was a pure, unadulterated efficiency machine. With 10 goals in just 12 matches, Lineker holds a record that few can fathom, particularly because of how he achieved it. In an era when English football was often characterized by long balls, physical tussles, and defensive attrition, Lineker functioned with the precise, understated elegance of a predator that knew exactly when to strike. He was the fox in the box, a moniker that didn't do justice to the sheer tactical intellect he brought to every single game. He didn't chase the game. He waited for the game to make a mistake, and then, with a devastating, clinical touch, he punished that mistake instantly. The 1986 World Cup in Mexico remains the defining chapter of his legacy. While the tournament is rightly remembered for the celestial brilliance of Diego Maradona, it was Lineker who claimed the Golden Boot, finishing as the tournament's top scorer. In the suffocating heat of the Mexican summer, while others were succumbing to exhaustion and tactical fatigue, Lineker was a beacon of sustained excellence. He moved across the pitch with an uncanny sense of timing, finding pockets of space between defenders who were, in theory, far more physically imposing. It was a masterclass in reading defensive lapses, A half step forward here, a clever change of pace there, that allowed him to repeatedly get into prime scoring positions. He proved that you didn't need to be the most physically dominant player on the pitch if you were the smartest. What makes his 10-goal haul so impressive is the variety of situations in which he thrived. He was a master of the header, the tap-in, and the composed finish, often relying on his teammates to provide the service while he provided the decisive, final contact. But to classify him as merely a beneficiary of good service is to ignore the proactive role he played in dismantling defenses. He was a constant nuisance, pulling centre-backs out of their comfort zones, making runs that forced teams to recalculate their defensive shape on the fly. He forced opponents to respect his presence every time he crossed the halfway line, and that respect often created the very space his teammates needed to operate. He played with a sense of calm that defied the frantic pace of international football. While everyone else was playing with their hearts, Lineker was playing with his eyes and his head. However, the shadow of that 1986 quarterfinal, the infamous match against Argentina, always loomed over his World Cup narrative. Despite his scoring brilliance, he was denied the ultimate prize, a fact that speaks to the cruel, unforgiving nature of tournament football. Lineker's story is one of personal excellence set against the backdrop of collective heartbreak, a theme that resonates deeply in our archives. He carried the English attack on his shoulders at a time when the national team was undergoing a period of profound transition and intense media pressure. He wasn't just scoring for himself, he was scoring for a nation that was desperate to reclaim its place among the elite. The sheer, repetitive consistency of his performances, he scored in match after match, against opponents who were specifically tasked with stopping him, showcases a level of professional dedication that is rare in any sport. We are moving past the record breakers into the territory of the true titans. The strikers remaining on our list are the men whose names are whispered with reverence in every corner of the globe. We are moving from the legends to the icons, the players whose World Cup stories are the very fabric of the tournament's mythology. If Lineker was the ultimate fox in the box, the next name on our list brought a level of raw, instinctive power that changed the way defenses prepared for a match entirely. He was a force of nature, a player whose name itself became shorthand for the fear he instilled in goalkeepers worldwide. We are reaching the point where the distinction between good and legendary becomes blurred, and where every single goal was a history-making event in its own right. The pressure of our countdown is intensifying, and the stories we are about to uncover are the ones that define the very fabric of the World Cup. Stay tuned as we unmask the sixth greatest goalscorer, a name that will undoubtedly spark debate among even the most knowledgeable football fans. Who comes next? The archive has the answer, and the story only gets more dramatic from here. To hold the record for the most goals in a single World Cup tournament is to exist in a dimension of footballing reality that simply defies logic. That is the throne occupied by our sixth greatest goalscorer, Just Fontaine. In the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, Fontaine did something that, by all accounts of modern sporting statistics, should have been impossible. He scored 13 goals in a single tournament. Read that again, 13 goals in 6 matches. It is a figure so bloated, so utterly aggressive, that it feels less like a sporting accomplishment and more like a statistical glitch in the matrix of football history. While most elite strikers aim for a goal-per-game ratio, Fontaine was operating at a 2-goal-per-game pace on the world's biggest stage. It was a 6-week stretch of brilliance that forever changed the way we view individual dominance in a collective sport. The 1958 tournament was a different time, played on heavier pitches and with equipment that lacked the aerodynamic precision of today, yet Fontaine's performance remains the gold standard of striking. There was a frantic, almost desperate energy to his play. He wasn't just scoring, he was in a race against the limits of the tournament itself. Every time he stepped onto the field, he seemed to know that his window of immortality was closing. He moved through the group stages and the knockouts with the clinical, unfeeling speed of a man who had no respect for defensive organization. It didn't matter who he faced, whether it was the disciplined units of the era or the most physical backlines in the game, Fontaine simply found the net. He was the ultimate opportunist, a striker who turned every single chance, no matter how small or unlikely, into an inevitability. What makes Fontaine's story so captivating is the suddenness of his impact and the abruptness of his exit. He didn't build a career of incremental records over a decade. He erupted onto the world stage, set the most difficult record in the sport, and then moved into the history books with a quiet, legendary certainty. His career was tragically cut short by injury, adding a layer of bittersweet irony to his record. He is the man who proved that you could conquer the World Cup in a single summer, an achievement that feels increasingly unreachable as the sport becomes more tactical, more data-driven, and more defensive. Today, strikers in 2026 are supported by entire departments of analysts, physical therapists, and tactical coaches, all working to squeeze every drop of efficiency out of their performances, and yet, no one has come close to touching Fontaine's 13-goal mark in 68 years. Watching the grainy footage of 1958, you see a player who combines sheer, raw instinct with a tactical fearlessness that is rare even in the elite circles of today. He wasn't waiting for the perfect pass. He was hunting the goal, anticipating where the ball would drop before the midfielders had even decided to hit it. He played with a singular, desperate intent that made him unmarkable. He represents the wild, untamed potential of the striker's role, a time when individual brilliance could still shatter the most rigid tactical blueprints. It's a performance that stands as a challenge to every striker who follows, a high-water mark that serves as a reminder of what happens when a player enters the tournament in a state of absolute, total flow. Fontaine didn't just score goals. He created a myth that has outlived his own playing career by more than half a century. But as we look at the names remaining on our list, we find ourselves moving into the territory of the heavyweights, the players who defined not just a single tournament, but entire generations of footballing culture. These are the icons whose goals are still narrated in the streets of Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, and Berlin. We are talking about players who carried the emotional baggage of entire nations and somehow still found the clarity to be clinical under the most immense pressure imaginable. As we transition to the fifth greatest striker on our list, we are entering the final, most elite tier. The next name is one that changed the very chemistry of the game, bringing a level of consistency and power that had never been seen before. If Fontaine was the flash of lightning that illuminated the sky for one glorious moment, the next striker was a thunderstorm that lasted for an entire decade. The stakes are reaching a boiling point now. The margins of error have vanished, and we are left with only the legends who managed to withstand the pressure that crushes everyone else. Stay with us as we uncover the fifth greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, a name that resonates through the annals of time as the very definition of a lethal finisher. The countdown continues, and the stakes are higher than they've ever been. To sit on the throne of World Cup goal-scoring history is usually reserved for the flamboyant, the dancers, and the architects of chaos. But the third greatest goalscorer in the history of the tournament is a man who built his legacy on something far more grounded: relentless, unyielding consistency. Miroslav Klose is the man who stared at Ronaldo's record of 15 goals and simply refused to let it stand as the final word. With 16 goals across 4 World Cup tournaments, Klose became the most prolific scorer in the history of the game's greatest stage. His story is not one of breathtaking individual dribbles or thunderous strikes that defied physics. It is a story of positional intelligence, aerial dominance, and a level of professional discipline that turned him into the ultimate survivor of the global stage. While others flamed out after 1 or 2 brilliant tournaments, Klose kept returning, kept scoring, and kept adapting, turning the World Cup into a lifelong project of accumulation. What makes Klose's record so fascinating is the contrast between his modest profile and his monumental achievements. He wasn't the star whose name appeared on the back of every shirt in every schoolyard, but he was the man who, when the tournament began, would unfailingly find the back of the net. He played with a sense of duty that was intrinsic to the German footballing machine he represented. He was the focal point of a team that demanded total synchronicity, and he rewarded that reliance by being the ultimate team player who happened to score more goals than anyone else. His movement was a study in patience. He would lurk, he would hold the line, and he would wait for the exact moment the defensive structure wavered. When the ball was delivered, Klose was there, often with a header or a simple, composed finish, to put the matter to rest. The 2014 World Cup in Brazil remains the crescendo of his career. At 36 years old, In a tournament dominated by the next generation of superstars, Klose didn't just participate. He cemented his place in history, netting the goal that pushed him past the Brazilian icon, Ronaldo. That goal, in the heart of Brazil, was perhaps the ultimate statement of his career. A player who, through pure force of will and physical maintenance, outlasted the rest of the world. It wasn't about flair, it was about the cold, hard reality of finishing. He had transitioned from the explosive, agile header of his youth to the master tactician of his final years, showing that the World Cup stage rewards those who can evolve as much as it rewards those who can dominate. Beyond the record books, Klose remains a symbol of an era. He represents a bridge between the traditional centre-forward who functioned as a battering ram and the modern, mobile striker who is part of a complex pressing system. His record is a challenge to every player who follows, a mark of 16 goals that defines the standard for longevity and reliability at the highest level. He taught us that greatness isn't always about the single, miraculous tournament. Sometimes, it is about the capacity to show up, year after year, and perform when the world expects you to be a step slower. He was a master of his craft, a man who understood the rhythm of tournament football better than almost anyone else, and his place in the top three is not just a reflection of his tally, but a tribute to the quiet intensity he brought to the pitch every time he wore the jersey. As we reach the final stage of our countdown, we are moving into the realm of the absolute immortals. We have reached the top two, the titans whose stories are the very soul of the World Cup. The strikers remaining are players who changed the sport's chemistry entirely, men who didn't just score goals, but who fundamentally shifted the way the world watched and understood football. We are talking about the two greatest talents of the modern era, figures whose legacies are so massive that they have become synonymous with the tournament itself. One is a player who turned velocity into art, and the other is a man who treated the pitch as if he were scripting a fairy tale in real time. The pressure has never been higher, the narratives have never been more dramatic, and the finale is finally upon us. Stay with us as we uncover the second greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, a man who redefined the speed of the game and became the heartbeat of the modern French Revolution. The countdown is reaching its final, breathless conclusion. To be the fourth greatest goalscorer in World Cup history is to occupy a space where human capacity seemed to transcend its own limits. We are talking about Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima, the Fenomeno. With 15 goals in 3 World Cups, Ronaldo didn't just score, he dismantled the very idea of how a defender should approach a forward. Before the injuries, before the weight of global expectation, and even after his miraculous return, Ronaldo was a paradox. He possessed the speed of a sprinter, the dribbling precision of a street kid from Rio, and the clinical, cold-blooded finishing of a seasoned predator. When you look back at his 15 goals, you aren't just looking at statistics. You are looking at a history of football being rewritten in real time. He was the prototype for the modern striker, the bridge between the old-school target man and the total athlete who could create his own magic out of thin air. The 1998 tournament was a masterclass in individual dominance that felt like a coronation, but it was the 2002 World Cup in Japan and South Korea that solidified his status as one of the greatest athletes to ever grace the planet. After years of injury hell, after being told his knee would never hold up to the rigors of elite professional football, Ronaldo returned to the grandest stage of all. He didn't just participate, he led Brazil to the title, scoring in the final, and claiming the Golden Boot. That tournament wasn't just a comeback, it was a defiant, cinematic reclamation of his throne. Every goal he scored in 2002 felt like a personal victory over the medical experts, the skeptics, and the fragility of his own body. He played with a joy that was infectious, a sense of liberation that only someone who has stared into the abyss of retirement can truly understand. What separated Ronaldo from his peers was his ability to make the impossible look routine. He could receive the ball in a crowded midfield, turn on a dime, and accelerate past 3 defenders before the crowd even realized he had control. His finishing wasn't about power, though he had plenty of it. It was about placement, composure, and the audacity to do exactly what the goalkeeper least expected. He had a sixth sense for the rhythm of the game, a way of manipulating the speed of play to suit his own narrative. There were moments in his World Cup career where he seemed to be playing against children, Such was the ease with which he bypassed the world's most elite defenders. He forced the opposition to focus entirely on him, creating space and opportunities for his teammates by the sheer gravity of his talent. But the legend of Ronaldo is not just about the goals. It is about the burden he carried. He was the face of the sport at a time when football was becoming a truly global commercial behemoth. He was expected to deliver every single time he stepped on the grass, and for the vast majority of his career, he did exactly that. His 15 goals are a testament to that reliability, a number that stood as the absolute benchmark for so long because it captured a career of sustained, elite performance. He represents the duality of the superstar, the untouchable hero who is also, fundamentally, a human being prone to the same physical limitations as everyone else. His story is one of the most compelling arcs in sports: a rise, a tragic, near-career-ending fall, and an improbable, glorious ascension that remains the gold standard for comeback stories. We are entering the final stages of our countdown. The names that remain are the ones who have transcended the sport itself, becoming cultural icons who exist in the collective memory of every football fan who ever lived. We have reached the final trio. The strikers remaining are players who changed the sport's chemistry entirely, men who didn't just score goals, but who fundamentally shifted the way the world watched and understood football. We are talking about the two greatest talents of the modern era, figures whose legacies are so massive that they have become synonymous with the tournament itself. One is a player who turned velocity into art, and the other is a man who treated the pitch as if he were scripting a fairy tale in real time. The pressure is nearing its peak, the narrative is reaching a boiling point, and the next player on our list is someone who redefined what the fans expected from a striker on the biggest stage. Are you prepared to see who is next in our journey through the archives? Stay with us as we uncover the third greatest goalscorer, a name that will undoubtedly spark debate among even the most knowledgeable football fans. The countdown continues, and the stakes are higher than they've ever been. To sit on the throne of World Cup goal-scoring history is usually reserved for the flamboyant, the dancers, and the architects of chaos. But the 3 degrees greatest goalscorer in the history of the tournament is a man who built his legacy on something far more grounded: relentless, unyielding consistency. Miroslav Klose is the man who stared at Ronaldo's record of 15 goals and simply refused to let it stand as the final word. With 16 goals across 4 World Cup tournaments, Klose became the most prolific scorer in the history of the game's greatest stage. His story is not one of breathtaking individual dribbles or thunderous strikes that defied physics. It is a story of positional intelligence, aerial dominance, and a level of professional discipline that turned him into the ultimate survivor of the global stage. While others flamed out after 1 or 2 brilliant tournaments, Klose kept returning, kept scoring, and kept adapting, turning the World Cup into a lifelong project of accumulation. What makes Klose's record so fascinating is the contrast between his modest profile and his monumental achievements. He wasn't the star whose name appeared on the back of every shirt in every schoolyard, but he was the man who, when the tournament began, would unfailingly find the back of the net. He played with a sense of duty that was intrinsic to the German footballing machine he represented. He was the focal point of a team that demanded total synchronicity, and he rewarded that reliance by being the ultimate team player who happened to score more goals than anyone else. His movement was a study in patience. He would lurk, he would hold the line, and he would wait for the exact moment the defensive structure wavered. When the ball was delivered, Klose was there, often with a header or a simple, composed finish, to put the matter to rest. The 2014 World Cup in Brazil remains the crescendo of his career. At 36 years old, in a tournament dominated by the next generation of superstars, Klose didn't just participate. He cemented his place in history, netting the goal that pushed him past the Brazilian icon, Ronaldo. That goal, in the heart of Brazil, was perhaps the ultimate statement of his career. A player who, through pure force of will and physical maintenance, outlasted the rest of the world. It wasn't about flair, it was about the cold, hard reality of finishing. He had transitioned from the explosive, agile header of his youth to the master tactician of his final years, showing that the World Cup stage rewards those who can evolve as much as it rewards those who can dominate. Beyond the record books, Klose remains a symbol of an era. He represents a bridge between the traditional centre forward who functioned as a battering ram and the modern, mobile striker who is part of a complex pressing system. His record is a challenge to every player who follows, a mark of 16 goals that defines the standard for longevity and reliability at the highest level. He taught us that greatness isn't always about the single, miraculous tournament. Sometimes, it is about the capacity to show up, year after year, and perform when the world expects you to be a step slower. He was a master of his craft, a man who understood the rhythm of tournament football better than almost anyone else, and his place in the top three is not just a reflection of his tally, but a tribute to the quiet intensity he brought to the pitch every time he wore the jersey. As we reach the final stage of our countdown, we are moving into the realm of the absolute immortals. We have reached the top two, the titans whose stories are the very soul of the World Cup. The strikers remaining are players who changed the sport's chemistry entirely, men who didn't just score goals, but who fundamentally shifted the way the world watched and understood football. We are talking about the two greatest talents of the modern era, figures whose legacies are so massive that they have become synonymous with the tournament itself. One is a player who turned velocity into art, and the other is a man who treated the pitch as if he were scripting a fairy tale in real time. The pressure is nearing its peak, the narrative is reaching a boiling point, and the finale is finally upon us. Stay with us as we uncover the second greatest goalscorer in World Cup history, a man who redefined the speed of the game and became the heartbeat of the modern French Revolution. The countdown is reaching its final, breathless conclusion. To reach the second spot in the pantheon of World Cup goalscorers is to exist in a rarefied air where speed, poise, and destiny collide. We are talking about Kylian Mbappé, a force of nature who has completely redefined what we expect from a forward in the 21st century. With 16 goals in just 3 tournaments, his ascent is not just impressive, it is unprecedented. If other legends built their legacies over decades, Mbappé has treated the World Cup stage as his personal playground since he was a teenager. When you watch the archive of his 16 goals, you are watching the evolution of a global icon. He possesses a blend of raw, terrifying pace and a cold-blooded finishing ability that makes him the most dangerous man on any pitch in the world. He doesn't just score, he breaks the spirit of the opposition, leaving defenders chasing shadows and goalkeepers grasping at air as he maneuvers through space with the fluidity of water and the lethal intent of an apex predator. Mbappé's trajectory through the World Cups of 2018, 2022, and this ongoing 2026 campaign is a narrative of sustained, impossible brilliance. He didn't just emerge as a prodigy in Russia, he commanded the stage, becoming the youngest player since Pelé to score in a World Cup final. That wasn't a fluke, it was a declaration. By the time 2022 arrived, the pressure on his shoulders was enormous, the expectation that he would carry the torch of French football forward, and he responded with the greatest individual performance in a World Cup final in modern memory. A hat-trick when the world was watching, under the most extreme emotional and physical duress, is the stuff of folklore. He is a striker who lives for the high-leverage moments. The bigger the crowd, the louder the stadium, the sharper he becomes. His record is not just about the numbers. Those 16 goals in such a short span is a feat of pure, sustained dominance. It is about his role as the protagonist. In the tactical landscape of modern football, where teams are coached to within an inch of their lives to stifle individual flair, Mbappé remains an outlier. He is the player who forces managers to throw their systems out of the window the moment he gains possession. His ability to accelerate from a standing start to top speed is perhaps the most frightening attribute in the sport, but it is his composure in the final third, that split second where he waits for the goalkeeper to commit, that makes him the heir to the legends we have already chronicled. He is not just a scorer of goals, he is a designer of iconic moments that will be replayed in slow motion for generations to come. As we stand here in 2026, witnessing his continued brilliance, it is impossible to ignore the sheer weight of his presence. He carries the history of the tournament with him, a player who has already achieved more by age 27 than most legends achieve in a lifetime. There is a sense of inevitability about his play. When he lines up to take a shot, there is a collective expectation that the net will bulge. He has brought a modern, global superstar energy to the tournament that is undeniable. But even for a player of his caliber, standing at the precipice of football history, there is one final, colossal shadow to contend with. One man stands above him, the only barrier to the absolute summit of our list. We have arrived at the end of our journey. The first place striker is not just a player, he is the definitive article, the standard by which all of history is measured. If Mbappé is the electrifying pulse of the modern game, the name that sits at the very top is the heartbeat of football itself. This is the moment we've been building toward, the story of a legend who cemented his status as the greatest World Cup goalscorer the planet has ever seen. The stats are finished, the archive is complete, and the final piece of the puzzle is ready to be revealed. Are you ready for the undisputed king of the World Cup? Because when we reveal the number one, we aren't just revealing a name, we are revealing the soul of the beautiful game, and the story of how he reached the absolute mountaintop will change everything you thought you knew about the price of footballing immortality. We have arrived at the summit. In the 12th and final block of our archive, we find the man whose World Cup narrative is the most improbable and, ultimately, the most satisfying story in the history of the beautiful game. With 18 goals across 5 different World Cup tournaments, Lionel Messi stands alone. But to measure his greatness solely by the count is to miss the point entirely. His journey was never about the accumulation of goals. It was a decades-long pursuit of an elusive, shimmering mirage, the World Cup trophy itself. For years, he was a genius playing in a vacuum, a player who had conquered every challenge at the club level but carried the suffocating, heavy weight of a nation that demanded he be their savior. To reach 18 goals wasn't just a statistical milestone. It was the final, triumphant answer to a lifetime of questions. It was the moment the world finally witnessed the closure of the most compelling arc in sporting history. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar was not just a tournament, it was a mission. From the opening shock against Saudi Arabia to the final, heart-stopping penalty shootout against France, Messi played as if he were guided by a higher force. He wasn't the fastest player on the pitch, and he certainly wasn't the most physically imposing, but he possessed a level of cerebral control that made the sport look like a game of shadows. Every goal he scored, the calm penalties, the clinical strikes from distance, the ones that came from sheer tactical persistence, carried the gravity of a man who knew exactly what was at stake. He didn't just carry Argentina, he elevated them, creating an atmosphere where his teammates found levels of performance that even they didn't know they possessed. It was a masterclass in leadership, a player who sacrificed his own ego to ensure that the collective machinery of the team reached the only destination that mattered. What defined Messi at the World Cup was his evolution from the explosive, dribbling prodigy of 2006 to the wise, tactical mastermind of 2022. He learned to manipulate the game with his eyes and his positioning, forcing defenses to tighten and collapse just to create space for others. He became a conduit for Argentina's collective soul. His final goal in the tournament, the one that broke the deadlock in the most high-pressure final in modern memory, was the perfect encapsulation of his entire career, a moment born of instinct, technical precision, and a total, unwavering belief that the ball would go in. It wasn't about raw power, it was about the perfect intersection of opportunity and genius. In that final match, he was not just a player, he was the center of gravity for the entire footballing world. His 18 goals are not just a record, they are a timeline of a life spent in pursuit of perfection. He has left an indelible mark on the tournament, proving that even a genius can struggle, even an icon can suffer defeat, and that, in the end, perseverance is the most powerful tool a player can possess. He has given us a career that will be analyzed, debated, and admired for a century. He is the standard by which all who follow will be measured, not just because of the goals, but because of the way he made us feel every time he stepped onto the pitch. The journey through our archive concludes here, at the feet of the man who turned football into a fairy tale. Every legend has a story the highlights never show, and Messi's story is the definitive proof. We've traveled from the clinical precision of Zengler to the speed of Mbappé, from the predatory hunger of Müller to the sheer will of Ronaldo, and finally, to the complete, all-encompassing genius of Messi. We hope this journey through the football archive has given you a new perspective on the history of the game. If you love football and want to truly understand the stories behind the stats, subscribe to the Football Archive and never miss a chapter. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the moments that defined our sport. Catch you in the next one. Bye.